Hello everybody, today I just wanted to talk about pushing on a companion druid to give people a realistic expectation of how far you're going to be able to go on the companion druid and what you're probably going to experience the higher up you get. So first off, how did the buffs affect pushing in general that we just got? And I would say it was a net neutral. The reason for this is because your passive damage is no longer going into the barber, but at the same time you have roughly what feels like a 20 to 30% increase of damage in your active. On top of you had the multiplicative change on aspect of the alpha, and so that this has caused your wolves to go all the way up and do something to the tune of like 38,000 to 50,000 damage in auto attack now, right? So, and it just kind of depends on like the mob type you're fighting and how much armor and whatnot that they have, right? Because it seems like there's a pretty big range on the auto attacks of the wolves. But because that passive damage is gone, if you have 4 wolves and they all attack, and let's say they all do 50,000, the max of the range, right? Okay, well now you have 200,000 damage. Well, that 200,000 damage, okay, well, they auto attack twice during a barber window, maybe even 3 times, so you have anywhere from 400 to 600,000 damage that's not being added in and multiplied by the barber, right? And then turned into an explosion, right? So this ended up being a net reduction because now all that damage is being taken away. Now obviously it's not that much because I was hitting for about 1.8 million, or I wouldn't say, well sorry, the amount is not being reduced by the 400,000 because before, the wolves were only doing like 15,000 damage on the passive and stuff like that, right? But it was still adding up over time and whatnot. But I have noticed that since the patch, my barber procs have been pretty significantly lower. I'm still seeing 1.8 million crits, but way less consistently is what I was before. Now I'm seeing somewhere around a million most of the time because that passive damage is just not being put into the barber. So whenever you get, especially in like single target situations, you can really notice it a lot whenever they can just waylay on the same thing, that it's just not doing as much damage. It's really unfortunate. So this has kind of caused a net neutral in terms of everything, because I know that like the multiplicative buff was big and I know that the buffs they received were pretty sizable, but the thing is their damage was extremely low before, right? So even with these huge buffs, it doesn't necessarily mean it's just going to fix them and make them giga OP. But you should notice a massive difference in terms of your low clears. Like my low clears are definitely way faster and way better than what they were before. And on the other bright side of this, it has taken away the reliance of the barber now. So like you still want to run the barber, it's still easily the best heart you can run with the build, but once the barber leaves, it's not going to be as big of a deal now as what it was before. Since you have just a ton of the companion damage that's not even going into it. The active still goes into it, but now you're going to notice your barber damage is really dependent on if you got a reset inside of your barber window. If you get a reset inside of your barber window, like see right there I did a 1.2 million, but it was because I got a reset inside of that barber window, right? Otherwise it's going to be lower. So it's way more dependent on that as opposed to just letting your companions auto attack and then getting way more consistent higher barber procs. So that's kind of why it's net neutral. The next thing that I noticed while I was pushing and going higher is that you have to run Storm's Companion, because if you look whenever I activate Storm's Companion, they do that little blink. Well, that fixes a huge issue that wolves have. One of the biggest issues wolves have is that when they jump to something, when you don't have Storm's Companion, they'll get stuck in the air sometimes, right? And if they're stuck in the air, that means they're not doing damage, which is kind of an issue, right? So you need to run it. Not only that, it turns them to a nature magic and a storm skill, so they benefit from things like Thunderstruck on the Paragon node tree. They benefit from storm skill damage increases, right? Like, see, there's a bunch of damage that they lose whenever you take that off, and that's really, really unfortunate. They also lose 2 multiplicative buffs in your skill point tree as well when you take that stuff off, right? So it's very, very unfortunate. So until we see something like a companion themed defensive, so like for example you get like 10% damage reduction per companion you have out or something like that, that might be super high, I don't know, but like until we see something like that, we're gonna probably end up running into some defense issues the higher up you go, once you get into like 80s, 90s, etc. Because then if you take off the pants, well then you're going to be lacking damage. And that goes into the next thing, is that the damage really, for like really high up, I just don't think is there yet, especially with that barber nerf. Like I think maybe if the barber nerf wouldn't have happened, maybe you could have gotten up pretty high. But because of that, you're pretty much relegated you're pretty much relegated into doing things like Surrat's Lair and stuff like that, like really fishing. If you want to do higher than a 70, like you're going to be fishing your ass off for like really good dungeon keys, because like Surrat's Lair, you don't really need a whole lot of damage to kill the mobs, so that's the reason why you'd be able to do it. But at the same time, when you're comparing it to other builds, right, other builds don't have that problem. That's why I like comparatively companions is going to be much worse than other builds for pushing, right? So that being said, like how companions are going to feel for you should go something like this. You're going to be able to clear up to like a 65, fairly easy. Once you hit 60, you might like die once or something, you know, to like some random effect if you get hit by something. But then once you get to 65, you're going to notice it gets a little bit harder. Then once you get to 70, you're going to notice it has gotten quite a bit harder. 70 seems to really be the top out spot in terms of like ease of being able to do it before you have to really start fishing, right? Like I'm doing a 75 here, and you can see that, you know, with this mob type, it's pretty rough, right? Now, but if I was in a Surrat's Lair, I probably wouldn't really have a problem clearing a 75. So it's really just all dependent on the dungeon you're doing, right? So that being said, that drops it down on the tier list when we live in a world now where lots of different builds can clear 100s fairly easily and fairly quickly, right? So when it comes to tier lists, though, before I give you like a rating of where I would put it, I think that there's two important distinctions that need to be made, right? Is that there's an in-game tier list. We're doing things like, you know, just regular dungeons or just leveling from 50 to 100, you know, doing level 50 to 100 nightmare dungeons, or sorry, well, not 50 to 100, but like tier 21 to 50 nightmare dungeons and stuff like that, on top of doing world bosses. And the companion druid can do all of that stuff just fine. So like I played the companion druid from 60 to 100. So you definitely can do it, and it's not hard. I'm talking you can do it with ease, right? As long as you have the right setup and you're running the right build, etc., right? Like I run a Crone Staff version of it that seems to be pretty smooth and worked really well for me. So that being said, if we're looking at it from a push tier list perspective, we're rating it solely on its ability to push. It's like a D tier build. If we're looking at it from its ability to just be played across the majority of content that you're going to be doing, aka leveling, world bosses, farming, doing just nightmare dungeons to level up and stuff like that, I would say it's a B tier build. You can speed this build up quite a bit, especially now after the buffs, since your wolves and stuff just do so much more damage. You can also move some of the damage reduction over to like movement speed and stuff like that I have, because I have like a push setup on right now, so I'm extremely slow. But you can put on all kinds of movement speed buffs on this, so you could change the boots out for the crits, get you move speed. You could put the double move speed secondaries on your boots. You could also put the move speed on your necklace because you don't need CDR in this build. So there's a lot of there is an okay amount of access to move speed on this build in terms of being able to move quickly. So I just don't have a whole lot of move speed rolled on mine. That's why generally speaking my builds look so slow, is because I just don't roll. I just, generally speaking, always set my characters up for push as opposed to move speed and like speed farming and stuff like that. So, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. So the TLDR is, if you're rating a companion build solely on pushing, it's a D tier build. If you're rating it solely on its ability to, for example, level, do other stuff, do lower nightmare dungeons like 21 to 50 and stuff like that, it's a B tier build for sure, right? Okay, so anyways, hopefully this has cleared up any issues or any confusion you've had, and hopefully helps inform you a little bit more on like where companions currently stand. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.